today. Aspen Academy is back, and we are so excited about that. And over the next few months, we're going to be exploring different ILSs that integrate with Aspen. So today, we are going to be talking about navigating Aspen and Polaris with confidence. And our special guest host today, who we are so grateful to have here, is Sarah St. Martin, who is the systems librarian at GMILCS Inc. And if you don't know, GMILCS Inc. is a nonprofit consortium of 13 public and academic libraries in New Hampshire, which we will learn more about very soon. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Elise. Yeah, I'll just get started here. I feel like I have a lot to cover. Um, like Elise said, we're a library of we're a nonprofit consortium of 13 libraries in New Hampshire. We have 12 public and one academic library. We've been on Polaris since 2008. Um, and there are two of us who work for the consortium, myself and then Kevin French, who's the system administrator. And In August of 2023, we started using Aspen as our catalog, and we manage kind of the admin side of it, but library staff do most of their own customization of their catalogs, and then also three libraries use it as their website. And we have a consortium group that's dedicated to Aspen only, and they meet 4 times a year and work on testing and agree on consortium-wide decisions and all stuff Aspen related. Um, so this is the general agenda, and I just do want to put a small disclaimer out there that everything presented here is to the best of my knowledge. What I mean is there may be settings that have changed since we migrated or things that I might have missed. So if you do see something you know that is not correct in your Polaris library, I won't be offended if you mention it. All right, so I'm just going to begin with some terminology differences. Um, So in Aspen Discovery, the item type corresponds to the material type in Polaris. The patron type is the patron code. We have permission roles in Aspen Discovery, and those are permission groups in Polaris, and they function a little bit differently, and I'll explain that. And then in Aspen, we have the Aspen administrators, and that corresponds to a patron account in Polaris. And again, I'll go into that a little bit more. Um, in tables, the value in Aspen is the ID, and I say usually in Polaris, and that's because there are plenty of tables that have IDs that have no connection to Polaris at all. Um, but for things like collections, branches, stuff like that, the ID corresponds to what it is in Polaris. And then in Aspen on the admin side, there are sublocations, and those correspond to the pickup areas in Polaris. And they are called pickup areas for the patron view, but in the admin side, it's sublocations. So I'll just start out with some staff access and permissions. Um, so for Polaris, if you're familiar with it, the Polaris login to Polaris itself is a completely separate login. You create the login and password, and then in system administration, you have the staff member. Um, and you assign them permissions and permission groups. In the Polaris client, you can assign individual permissions, but in the web admin, you can only assign permission groups. And permission groups contain multiple permissions. Many staff members can be added to a permission group, so it's really easy to see who is in that permission group. And just as I mentioned before, the Polaris login is completely separate from a staff member's library or patron account. I know in other ILSs, it's the same. It's the library kind of barcode patron account, but in Polaris, it's completely separate. So the Aspen admin side, you have the Aspen administrator, and this corresponds to a patron account in Polaris. So again, it's nothing to do with the actual Polaris login. And on the Aspen side, you have permission roles, and you don't have the ability to assign an individual permission to a staff member. So if you only wanted a staff member to be able to create basic web pages, you would have to create a permission role with that permission in it. And Staff are individually assigned permission roles. You can't open up a permission role like you can open up a permission group in Polaris and see everyone that's assigned, but it's very easy to sort in that view in Aspen by a permission role to see all the staff members that have them. Um, and then the only other difference is in Polaris, permission groups, at least for consortia, are designated by branch. So the permissions are kind of separated by branch. But in Aspen, the permission roles are all shared, and the setting in the role determines whether it's a system setting or just for the home library. So our GMILCS setup, for us, we wanted an Aspen login that was separate from a staff member's library account to maintain a level of security in terms of who had access to Aspen and where. So we created a new patron code in Polaris called Aspen, and this is only for catalog management. It has no borrowing privileges. And just as a note, if you do go this route, you have to add a password to that patron account in order to assign Aspen permissions. We ran into this because a lot of libraries were creating all their new accounts by copying, and they were forgetting to add a password, and we couldn't assign any permission rules in Aspen until they did. So we gave masquerade mode as an automatic permission for these counts based on that Aspen patron code. And this was another reason why we didn't use staff personal library accounts, because some libraries didn't want all of their staff to have this permission. We also disabled reading history in masquerade mode to mirror what staff see in the Polaris patron account. And we restricted masquerade mode by IP, so staff can only access that part inside their library building to just further ensure patron privacy. And then we also took the opportunity to use this patron login to give access to our GMILCS help desk, which we had migrated from SharePoint to Aspen. In terms of patron-facing settings for self-registration, we do use the ILS-based. And what we found when we migrated was that there are several settings in Aspen that we have to set separately, even if they are already set in Polaris. So requiring a birth date is an example where even if it's set in Polaris, you do have to also check that off in the Aspen admin settings. And what we tried to do in general is to make sure that the desired setting is correct in Polaris and also in Aspen, even if they are separate. And this just ensures consistency across both systems. One great feature in Aspen is that we can limit New Hampshire as a valid state for self-registrations. And this has helped keep down on the out-of-state online registrations that occurred that were not valid. So if someone does want to get a non-resident card from out of state, they have to come into the library first instead of just creating one online. And this just cuts down, saves staff time from having to go in monthly and delete all those registrations for patrons who were never coming into the library. So continuing on self-registration, if you are a Polaris library and you don't have telephony set up, you know that you can't use phone as a notification option in Polaris because no notices will be generated if that notification option is set. So we wanted to make sure patrons weren't selecting this when they were registering. So we used a JavaScript snippet to just hide that option in the self-registration. The other important thing we did was we removed a modify postal codes table, Polaris permission from the Aspen staff member. And the Aspen staff member is the account created in Polaris for the API. And removing this permission just meant that we weren't getting all these new postal codes added to that table. If a patron entered the wrong city or misspelled it and a different patron or a different zip code, it would create a new entry in that table. And it was just becoming confusing for staff because that would pop up when they were registering patrons, and it was just a lot to maintain. So if a patron enters a zip code and town combination that doesn't exist, they'll just get this message. And that's just been really helpful for us. And then one last thing to note is that there's no automatic email to staff for new self-registrations. That this aspect of Polaris is just not available via the API. And Aspen currently doesn't have its own built-in email option, but there is a Jira issue for this, so it might happen in the future. So for login, our libraries wanted to add a link on the login page to let patrons know they could create a username, which is something that the Polaris Power Pack has. We added login notes to create that link. It's a little clunky because you still have to log in and it looks like the same screen. But once you log in, you are brought to that page to create a username. So it's just a little different than the Power Pack, but it essentially functions the same way. And then we just translated the message to match Polaris's documentation for username requirements. So for passwords and PIN, this is another one of those settings that has to be set in both Polaris, and then you have to also check it off here in Aspen. And then we just increased the maximum PIN length to 64 to match Polaris. I believe Aspen defaulted to 16. And for contact information, again, some of these things have to be checked off separately in Aspen, and they're a little more restrictive. Um, First of all, there's no confirmation email that's sent to a patron that they have changed anything in their account. And then the other option is you can't submit a change request. So in Polaris, some of our libraries use this patron address change allowed, but they can submit a change request. So that would notify the patron that their request was submitted, and in their patron account in Polaris, a block would pop up so staff would know that they would need to check identification to verify that address. So because this isn't an option in Aspen, we just did not check off um, to allow patrons to change their address because there would be no way for staff to verify that. So linked accounts versus associations. Um, Linked accounts in Aspen are great. It allows patrons to link their own cards. It allows them to see and manage checkouts, holds, fines for all cards under one login. It's in Aspen only and it's designed for patron use. It's all about customer service and convenience for the patron. Associations in Polaris are for library staff. They're just designed for library staff use. Library staff create the associations and it lets staff quickly manage associated accounts between families. They can easily link to the accounts to renew, pay fines, and it also allows them to block borrowing privileges between cards if they want. And then also an easy way to identify who can pick up holds for who. So both of them are very useful in their own way, but just the Aspen side is for patrons only, and the associations in Polaris are for staff only. They're completely separate. All right, now we're just going to talk a little bit about data mapping. Um, so information is taken from item records in Polaris and added to Aspen's staff view of the MARC record, and it's added as a 952 field. And then you have all these subfields that correspond to everything else in the item record. So this first example just shows 3 different items on the same bib record. You can see this one has a barcode and it's on hold, and it already has a last activity date and a first available date. This one, there's nothing in the barcode field yet. That's because the status is still on order. And then this one down here I just showed because subfield O shows the whole entire call number, but then subfield H shows just what's in the volume field. We use first available copy for our movies, so it's just an easy way to see what's specifically in the volume field. Note that item stat codes and price do not import into Aspen. That wasn't the item stat codes wasn't an issue for us, but I have heard from at least one other library that they had to make changes because that wasn't available for them in Aspen. In terms of the item price, this does affect the library savings in Aspen. So the library savings is in Aspen only. And because there's no price that's imported into that 952 in the bib record in Aspen. If you want to set up library savings, you have to use the replacement costs by format. And our libraries decided they didn't want to do this because the cost for a book could vary widely between a paperback, a hardcover, a cookbook, an art book. So they didn't feel it would be an accurate representation. We do use the you've saved receipt messages in Polaris. This does use the price in the item record. If one doesn't exist, it does default to the generic replacement cost settings. But I mean, the vast 95% of our items um, have prices in them. So we're just using that one at this point. So data mapping and item call numbers. Polaris does have a setting where you can add a call number to an on-order item record from the bib record. And this is if there's no data in that item call number field. And if it's not enabled, the call number just remains blank. If that call number is blank, Aspen was adding the bib call number to the item record display. And we have libraries that didn't like seeing this long string of numbers in the call number field. They felt it was inaccurate or misleading. And we also have two libraries that don't use Dewey. So we removed the settings in this bib-based call number field. And so that removed the display here if you go into the item record for the call number. And it was great because this field only impacts, this setting only impacts this field in Aspen. So when we migrated and Polaris data imported into the translation maps, there are two entries. So the first one shows the value, which is the ID in Polaris, and then what the wording is. But then there's also this duplicate name entry. So it's just something to be aware of. If you're changing things, you have to change them in twice. After this initial import, if you make changes in Polaris, they don't always sync with this translation map. We cleaned up a bunch of our collections, and we had to go in and manually just change these here in this translation map, and you just have to change them twice. And then the other thing, we wanted to suppress electronic resources, and you just had to use a translation with the capital letters, the value or the movies, the ones with uncapitalized didn't work. So the collections and the shelf location facet are tied to one setting, and our libraries wanted shelf locations to only show their results and collections to show for all libraries. This is because we share collections, but shelf locations are set up by library, and there are like hundreds of them. So it was making the facet not useful or applicable if the shelf location didn't apply to that library's building. So to do this, step one is we had to uncheck include all records in the shelving facets because this is what ties the shelving and the collection facets together. So unchecking this made it so that the shelf location facet would only return results for that scoped library. And then step two, we created a custom facet for collections to return results from all libraries. So here we did the 952 and subfield 8. If you go back a few slides, that was the one for collections. And then step three was we removed the built-in collection facet and added in the custom one facet and named it collection. So now the collection is showing everything for all libraries. And this is just an example of that. We didn't do this in the consortium catalog, obviously, but you can see collection for this result. Everything is showing the same number of items, but shelf location, this Hooksett one is only showing their shelf locations. This Derry one is only showing theirs. And you can see at the consortium level how confusing it can get when they were showing all children's room, children's level, young adult room, children's room. So works much better this way by separating it out. So there's a few deleting quirks for syncing bibs and items. The first one is when you're canceling a purchase order line item in Polaris, it doesn't change the bib or item modification date, and that's what most of the APIs are using to update and sync with Aspen. So if it's the last copy, um, and you cancel the purchase order line item, that display and pack is unchecked in the bib. The item is completely gone, but the display and pack is unchecked. And this updates the modification date and is caught by the API endpoint, and that item's not going to show up in Aspen. The issue is if it's not the last copy, then there's no change to the bib and the item is purged. So Aspen doesn't have anything to update on. So the two workarounds that our libraries use is they either uncheck the display and pack in the item first, wait a minute for it to sync, and then they cancel the poly, or they cancel the poly and then save the bib in Polaris or force a reindex in Aspen and that updates it. And the other little quirk is we use the Polaris settings retain deleted bib records and item records. Um, some libraries really want that item to not show up for them in Polaris, and they were deleting it twice, completely purging it, and they were doing it quickly enough that Aspen didn't catch that modification date sync. So again, if they're double deleting an item, they just delete it once, wait until Aspen syncs, and it doesn't show up anymore, and then delete it again. So if you use shelving cart status in Polaris, you know it's not a real status. It's a temporary kind of location status, and you can pick the time frame for how long it shows up. Our libraries each use it differently. Some don't use it at all. Some have it for 6 hours, some have it for 12 hours. And Aspen doesn't pick up on that change because nothing's happening. It's just an internal thing changing it from shelving cart to in. So what we did to help alleviate this is we mapped the group status to on shelf. We kept the status as shelving cart again because each library is doing something different, but you could also map this status to in. Um, and then this is how it shows in Aspen. And now it shows as on shelf, and this is really what most patrons are looking at. Down below, this is after the time frame has already passed for this library. So in Polaris, the status shows as in, but if you went into the copies view in Aspen, it still says shelving cart until something else happens to that item, like it's checked out or saved or something. But again, most patrons are looking here as on shelf. So um, that's the most important thing. For holds, we discovered that when you freeze or suspend a hold, it defaults to Polaris's 2 years if a date is not selected. So we just translated this text to make it more accurate. So instead of the hold will be inactive until you reactivate it, we translated it to if the date is not selected, the hold will automatically be reactivated 2 years from today. So you know exactly what you're getting into when you do that. So pickup areas and sublocations. We have a few libraries who have different pickup areas inside their building or lockers. So Aspen syncs when the pickup area is created in Polaris. If it's deleted in Polaris, it doesn't delete in Aspen. But as of 2510, the valid hold pickup area in Aspen is deactivated when the pickup area is deleted in Polaris. And this is actually a really great feature of Aspen. This doesn't exist in the Polaris Power Pack, and I don't believe it exists in Discover Vega either yet. So you can hide sublocations in Aspens, and this allows for staff-only pickup areas for book groups, story times. So you can see in this example, um, you have the children's room. It's a valid hold pickup area in the ILS, and you can't change that because that's set at the ILS. And it's a valid hold pickup area in Aspen. But this staff book group, they want this to only be for their staff. So we unchecked this box here. And now if you were to place a hold, in Aspen, only their two valid ones show up and not this staff only one. So it really allows for some flexibility for staff to have a lot more just options for themselves that the patrons don't see. So while patrons can select a preferred pickup area, I mean, a pickup branch and a preferred pickup area in Aspen, these preferences do not sync with Polaris. So patrons could potentially have a different preference in Aspen and Polaris. And in fact, Polaris only saves and displays the preferred pickup branch in the patron registration. You can't even set a, a pickup area. So just know that those could be different. Web resources in Aspen versus eSources in Polaris, they're fairly similar. In Aspen, you can list them under categories that you can create or an A to Z list. eSources in Polaris, you can list them under customized heading by library. So they're a little different. I'd say one of the main differences is in Aspen, you can limit to in-house IPs, and you can limit to who can see the eSources, I mean the web resources if you're logged in or not. But the authentication usually occurs at the resources site. And so the difference in the Polaris pack is that um, if you're logged into the pack, you'll also automatically be logged into the resource when you click on it. The good thing about Aspen is that these resources can show up in the Explore More box, and in the Power Pack, they're just you have to go to that eSources page to see them. So we switched our integration for Libby and Cloud Library from Polaris to Aspen when we went live with Aspen. And some of the differences are the checkouts and holds do not show in a patron account in Polaris, but staff just use Masquerade mode to troubleshoot issues for that. Cataloging staff used to do a lot of editing to the bib records in Polaris for these ebooks and the audiobooks. Now they don't have to do that at all. All they do is they check new titles each week in Aspen and they group them if they're not grouped. Not having this data in the Polaris database saves a huge amount of space. If you have this integration now, you know item records are created for each library, for each copy of each overdrive title, which is like hundreds of thousands of items. And as a result, that we don't have all that in there now, our Polaris upgrades are shorter because the reindexing doesn't take as long. And then, so side loads in Aspen versus resource entities in Polaris. Essentially, they're the same. Records are loaded into Aspen, records are imported into Polaris. The nice thing about Aspen is that they display in the e-content facet and they group if appropriate, which is great. The resource entities just displayed with a link in the owning catalog. Generally, we have a lot more side loads in Aspen. We only had, I think, one or a couple libraries who would import some of their resource entities, a couple from Hoopla, a couple from Biblioboard. But now in Aspen, because it's so easy and staff can do it on their own, we have, you know, Canopy sideloaded, Creative Bug, Learning Express, Tumble Books, Comics Plus. So there's just a lot more that's easily managed in Aspen. So it makes it more just works better for libraries. All right, so I know I just flew through all of that. I guess we can get to any questions, if there are any.
It looks like there wasn't any that came in the chat, but yes, if anybody has any questions, feel free to. But I think you covered everything so well. Nobody has questions. That was amazing and so thorough.
Yeah, there's a lot in there when you're trying to get it all done, but
Oh, Trisha said that was great. Thank you. Brian said so valuable. Exactly what I wanted to learn.
excellent.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, learned so
yeah, if
much.
anyone has any follow-up questions, that's my contact info and then a link to our consortium catalog, and you can get to all the individual catalogs um, from there.
Perfect. Well, everybody has Sarah's information now, so feel free to reach out and stay in touch. Oh, do you use author authorities?
Um, we um, we only manage them if there are issues. We have authorities in Polaris, But then in Aspen, where those sometimes those links don't work correctly, we only manage them if there are issues.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, this session has been recorded and it will be sent out to everybody. Feel free to share with your colleagues. And yeah, that's it. Stay tuned for the next Aspen Academy in December. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.